Hi, everyone. Good evening. Carl Steinbeck here, Sunday night, covering the Adelson case out of Tallahassee, Florida. There's a murder case going on there with 75-year-old Donna Adelson. She is the second Adelson to be charged. The first Adelson was tried and convicted and spending life without parole. That's former dentist, doctor type Charlie Adelson, Donna's son. So Donna's facing trial here on the 19th of August there in Tallahassee. And it's going to be in large part for the prosecution anyway, a repeat of what they'd already tried the son on. And so I wanted to cover tonight, though, one of the other conspirators to this case, the unindicted co-conspirator named by the state attorney's office, and that's the ex-wife of FSU law professor Dan Markel, who was gunned down in his garage way back over 11 years ago in Tallahassee there. He was a father of two young boys with those boys only being 3 and 4 at the time, and they have had all these years of unsettling issues going on where these Adelsons were doing everything they can to shield them from the surviving members of Dan Markel's family, specifically his parents, Phil and Ruth Markel, as well as Dan's sister Shelley and her extended family. So it's been a really cruel road because there's been visitation that's mostly been sabotaged. Most of these growing formative years of their lives where these Markells are just such phenomenal people that have had such dignity and grace surviving through this ordeal of not only their son being gunned down and slaughtered, and then they also have to deal with the denial of visitation and just the utter sheer cruelty of keeping their two grandsons away from them, changing their last names even, gutting the Markel name, even the middle names, which are an honor to the Markel lineage. So this was really a cold-blooded execution-style murder, and it was all because Dan would not give up custody of the boys, would not leave his job, that he wanted to be a loving father to his two boys and wanted to do co-parenting with Wendi in terms and in accordance with the custody arrangement that was specified and set forth in very clear-cut details like we have here in the United States of when the boys would be with mom, when they'd be with dad, what other details are worked out. So this is something that is very disturbing and troubling to me. What got me fired up on this case was my brother talking about the cruel visitation issues being denied to Dan Markel, and then they wound up gunning him down when Wendi was going to get busted in civil court proceedings and family law court there in Tallahassee for doing all kinds of stuff to not only harm Dan and his visitation efforts with the boys, but also allowing her mother to say mean, cruel things about Dan in front of these precious little boys. So in any event, tonight, I want to go back to this issue of what indicators do they have of Wendi Adelson being involved in this conspiracy to murder Professor Dan Markel. And she's presumed innocent under the law, of course. But what do they have against her? Thanks to Florida having sunshine records laws, we can actually do a peel back the onion look at what do they have against her? What stuff has she done that makes it look like she is complicit in this? And I submit that after reviewing all these indicators, you're just going to be wondering what's taken them so long. So there's no doubt in my mind, having done many violent crimes, both as a prosecutor and defense counsel, both in the military setting, which is the same as a federal type system, as well as in the state court systems where I've done stuff, both prosecuting and defending violent type crimes. So I feel like I have an excellent read on the jury and being able to predict outcomes. And so my prediction is that they still are going to circle back to Wendi Adelson after Donna's convicted. And I hope they don't wait much longer because she is moving around the country. She's moved from Miami to Austin, and now supposedly they don't even know where she's at. They're thinking she's in Colorado. And I'm learning that from the Markells based on the fact that they don't even know where their grandchildren are right now. So it's very, very sad, troubling thing to know that these folks in their 80s cannot see their grandchildren, and they've already lost their son from over 11 years ago, and now they don't even know where the grandchildren are. So it's it's utter sheer unmitigated cruelty, as I've said many times. And so I think the prosecutor needs to up their game and think about these boys and what they've been put through. And maybe her next step is to flee the country. Maybe she's going to fly out of Denver International and fly to some other country like Mexico City, Mexico, and then who knows where she could wind up from there. So I don't know if she's in Denver. We don't know for sure where she's at. There's just rumors at this point, and I'm not really there to track her down or anything. I'm just there to shine the light on the injustice of the whole thing, the plight that and suffering that the Markells have gone through, and to just talk to you guys as a very experienced trial attorney, criminal defense and prosecution uh, person that just calls it like it is. So I didn't come into this with any preconceived ideas that automatically the defendant is there's not going to be enough evidence to go after him, or that it's overwhelming. I just came in there with a open mind, and so these kind of indicators are things that you can see for yourself. These are not ranked order in order of significance, so the number one is not the strongest, and nor is it the weakest. And I can comment on maybe some of the ones that are stronger, but you can formulate your own opinions because as jurors, and mind you, if you're on the jury and you're listening to this kind of evidence, not all jurors are going to agree on what is the most important detail. I think most all jurors, though, would probably agree with what are the top five. And so we will go through these tonight. And if I see some comments you guys have or some insights to add to these points, you guys that have been following this channel and following this case, you guys are seasoned experts on the many finite details of this case. So we try to keep this channel clean. So consider your language appropriate for what you'd say in front of a judge that was deciding your case. So I want to have it all professional. And so appreciate your support for the Markells. We've had Phil Markel on this channel a couple times making comments as well. So maybe he'll be on tonight if you're there, sir. Greetings to you. And we all are eagerly waiting the slow but continued march for justice for what had happened to your son over 11 years ago. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. For the first one, we have as an indicator, Wendi wrote a novel before she even filed for divorce, like about 2 years before she filed for divorce. It was a novel, it had to do with immigration and trafficking of humans. And she basically, though, acknowledged in her book that this book was written to reflect a lot of life experiences she had, some of the things in her own life. And this book basically talked about Lily as being the main author of this book, and it was a story about through the lens of Lily's life, what she had to deal with, and what she was basically doing was putting a lot of different spin on the things that were involving her life and Dan's life in terms of names. So it wasn't Tallahassee, it was Hiawassee, and instead of Wendi, it was Lily, and so there's a lot of similarities going on, and the way she described this Lily's hatred of some uncivilized small town in Florida that she lived in, and there's also a lot of digs that are at the husband of Lily in that book as well. And so this is something that is very much showing how Wendi despised Tallahassee, and she told Jeff Lacasse all the time how much she hated it. It was a daily thing she brought up, how much she hated Tallahassee and how a nasty person, in essence, Dan Markel was. So this is, and that, of course, was not accurate, but it was part of her agenda of the setup of Jeff Lacasse to be the fall guy. So anyway, this book, if you read this book, it's a terrible read, but it's very insightful for showing what exactly was going through her mind even years before she filed it. She did not like Dan. She hated the area, and she wanted to get back to South Beach. So let's go ahead and jump on to number 2 then. The second indicator is that Wendi resorted to a Pearl Harbor, that's what Dan referred to it, divorce type filing and notice to Dan while he was on a trip to New York City. She vanished for days with the kids. Dan flew back right away after finding out. She left him a message saying, hey, I filed for divorce already. So he frantically left the business trip, came back as soon as he could. And when he got there that night, he found out the boys were gone and her whereabouts were unknown with the boys for a couple weeks. He also noticed that there was a couple hundred thousands of cash missing, most of their furniture, most of the boys' belongings and clothes. And there's also a Markel family heirloom from World War II, a Holocaust survivor that was taken. And you know what? Dan has never got that back while he's still alive. And the fact that Wendi could hold that is just beyond belief. If a jury hears about that she has not given that ring back, the Holocaust survivor ring, I'm telling you, that is a scathing indictment of the level of hatred. It's not been brought up at any point in any of these other trials where she's been forced to testify by the state on their case in chief. So is it going to happen this time when she's forced to testify against her own mother, Donna, in a couple weeks? So the thing is the way she was doing this divorce, it wasn't about an amicable reconciliation. How do we work it out, Dan? It was all like revenge. It was all like smiting Dan. It was all like rubbing his face in the ground. Is really all about what's the most damage I can do to punish him and show my hatred for him. And to this day, we still see that hatred of anything having to do with the Markel name. So it's very hard to watch and hard to stomach. All right, for number 3, in a February motion of 2014, Dan questioned how Wendi could teach law students at the FFU Law Clinic, given her false, misleading representations to the court. Dan was saying that she was misleading the court. She's in defiant of court requirements on visitation. And he had a whole litany of different things that he was saying were wrong about Wendi and not acting in good faith as a co-parent for those two boys. So he mentioned this in a footnote in the motion. And by doing so, I think this really made Wendi realize that, you know what, I could lose my job because she only got this job because Dan had his job, and that was a part of the condition. She got this part-time adjunct professor job there at the FSU Law Clinic. So she wasn't a full tenured professor like Dan was. Dan was a highly respected and regarded professor there, and he had all the clout with that school, and they did not want him to leave. They were very much interested in making him a long-term pillar of that legal community there at the FSU Law School. So this thing here, I think, was what really set her off and really helped up the ante to say, you know what, I need to get to Miami, and he's going to make things ugly for me. So he's calling me out on stuff. So I got to fight dirty, right? If you can't fight in court and come out looking good, then why not fight dirty? So that's what it appears to be here. Number 4 for indicators, we have in March 11th of 2014, when he went to dinner at a place called Yardbirds down there in the Miami area, where she met Katie McBanois, who eventually became the middleman or middle person for the hit. She recruited the father of 2 boys, Sigfredo Garcia, to do the killing of Professor Dan Markel, who lived 7.5 hours away. And then we also know that Wendi would go to the beach with Katie a few months later in June, and this was a photo of them there at the beach. So think about it. Wendi actually had a connection, a face-to-face connection more than once with the killer. And this was her her brother's girlfriend. So Katie McBanois was dating her brother, dentist Charlie Adelson. So their whole meetup started when Charlie asked her within 2 weeks of dating her, it's like if she knew anybody that could put some hurt on somebody. And she said, yes, I do. And I believe that's the whole reason he dated her and kept dating her until the murder happened some 8 months later. So while Charlie's dating Katie McBanois to be a recruiter and a middleman We also saw that Wendi started dating Jeff Lacasse. So Jeff Lacasse was somebody that was also being groomed for purposes that made it easier for her to slip out of town and have somebody to point the finger at. So we'll get more to that later. So let's go on to the next here. Number 5. Jeff Lacasse said that during the month of June of 2014, Wendi was acting very strange. He would find her crying for no apparent reason. So he'd maybe be, for example, like in the living room playing with the kids, and then he'd come in the kitchen, and Wendi would be crying for no reason, and she wouldn't tell him what's going on. So that's something that he found very odd. And so there could be any number of reasons why she's crying, but she was. It could have been the fact that she's worried about in court facing the losses there because Dan had filed contempt motions against her. She was also realizing she could maybe be out of job and maybe have trouble with the state bar based on Dan saying she was doing things that were not fitting and becoming of a lawyer. So that I think is a good indicator clue that something's going on, some internal struggles and things needed to get rectified. And so this is sort of a prelude to having to fix things here, her being emotionally very disturbed. For number 6, we have Wendi forced the kids and Jeff Lacasse to watch a movie on a broken TV screen. And she also refused to use the other fully functional TV screen she had in another room. Jeff Lacasse was saying, well, why don't we just go in the other room? And she was like, no, where she's insisting upon, we must watch this movie about dragons or something. And the boys were upset about this. They were crying, as Jeff Lacasse reported, and they're upset throughout the whole movie. So that begs the question, why would somebody do this to their own boys? It wasn't convenience to be watching a broken screen. Nobody does that. So it looks like she wanted to have this whole thing be really reinforced in Jeff's mind that I have a broken TV and getting the TV fixed is a big deal. And so much so that I don't even want you to buy me a replacement TV. So Jeff was like, I'll just buy you another one. You only want to watch TV in that room. So the infamous TV here remained broken for over a month. And so that's, I think, a real clue that what would soon to be later known as the TV was code for the murder of Dan Markel. So we have this extremely odd situation going on where kids are even crying because they don't want to watch a cracked screen movie. And can you think of any reason why a parent would do that? I can't think of a single one, a normal reason why a parent would do that. So that was brought out in the previous trials as well. Number 7, Wendi behaved suspiciously on 4 June. That was the night that she was a nervous wreck. She had an upset stomach, and to the point that Jeff Lacasse had to drive 35 minutes round trip to get some Pepto-Bismol. And yet Wendi wouldn't specify the cause. So again, she's being very nervous, very, very suspicious acting. There's a previous hit attempt up there in the month of June as well by the hitman. So was this a tie-in to that? And then we have Wendi in early July visiting her parents down there in Miami, and she texted to Dan Markel asking about child visitation on the window of July 14th to the 18th. And keep in mind, he was gunned down the 18th of July. So here's Wendi asking him, are you in Tallahassee, July 14, 18? I just want to know if I can have the kiddos on the 16th. Thanks. Why is that window so important? Why is she asking in a window, are you going to be in town those days? Is that the days that they're trying to coordinate to get the hitman to go back up there? Why wouldn't she just say, hey, can I have the kiddos on the 16th? Why wouldn't she just say that? Why she got to do that window? So I think that's a real revealing clue that something else is amiss here. Something else is at planning stages. So she was down there for almost 2 weeks. So that would have been the perfect time to plan something. She's down there with her parents and with Charlie. All right, next we have number 9. Wendi insisted to Jeff Lacasse that when planning to visit St. Augustine on the 18th of July, that happened to be coincidentally the weekend of the murder. They must leave early in the morning, as she was worried about missing the boys at a 4 p.m. custody handoff, but the trip never occurred. Is this one of those things where she was toying with Jeff again? So there's some mention of St. Augustine, and it looks like it could be a lure for Jeff Lacasse to just keep him stringing along, making it look like, hey, I'm serious enough with you to bring you along on a family trip. So keeping him on again, off again was sort of like really making him to the point that he was upset and thinking about leaving this situation. But anyway, thankfully, as we know, Jeff Lacasse left town early. Otherwise, this whole plan would have been working beautifully to try to set him up as a fall guy. So number 10 here, Wendi canceled a trip to California with Jeff Lacasse out of fear of being late for custody exchange the next day. Did she ever really buy a ticket? That's something that hasn't come out yet. Jeff bought his ticket, but did she really buy hers? Why would she want to meet Jeff's parents if she wasn't serious about dating him? And as we learned from the last trial with Charlie, Wendi was seeking out other dates on the OkCupid website. So while stringing Jeff along, trying to look like they're serious, here she is seeking out other dates and supposedly want to go see his parents, but then she backs out of that trip under the reason that she's worried about not making the trip back for a custody handoff. So that just sounds so much of a bogus reason to back out. All right, next we have number 11. During a weekend in Gainesville at the end of June, this is 2014 still, the month before Dan was assassinated, Jeff confronted Wendi about seeing other men. Though she had seemingly been auditioning Jeff for the role of husband and father, talking to him about moving in, don't buy a house, don't buy a Jeep because it's not kid-friendly, all these kind of things. All the while, Wendi was on dating sites like OkCupid. So what's going on here? Why are you treating Jeff Lacasse this way? Jeff was getting two different mixed messages, which supports the contention and his belief that, hey, I felt like I was being set up as a fall guy to look like the crazed, jilted lover that wanted to come back and be the hero for Wendi by killing her ex-husband. All right, so next we have number 12. Wendi emptied a joint safe deposit back in July of 2012 and completed the divorce parenting course months before filing for divorce. So this was it's a very strategic mode that she's going, and also that she was very calculating and making Dan think the marriage is recovering so then she could turn around just like completely like emotionally crush him the way she did with that Pearl Harbor style divorce filing. So who does this kind of stuff? Why would she be into this kind of agenda where you're just really trying to mess with Dan's mind that way? Number 13, a few weeks before his murder, Dan told their joint friend Tamara Demko that things were heating up. It's getting ugly. He's going to mattresses. And maybe said mats or whatever, but Tamara in her interview said mattresses. And she also said the situation, according to Dan, was blowing up. And Dan just didn't discover any kind of fraudulent concealment, though, until after the divorce. And so Dan was raising this issue before a June court hearing. And it's likely that Wendi knew that these fraud allegations were coming down the pike and she would have to face a deposition and face a court date for it down the road. So the pressure was definitely mounting for Wendi, and it was not looking good. For 14, we have vicious post-divorce litigation buildup that would likely result in severe outcomes for Wendi. She wanted to change the custody location to Miami. The latest filing allegations and pending allegations from Dan, who was telling others he was going to drop a legal bomb on Wendi for over $240,000 that was stolen and unreported in assets in the divorce filing, and also swiping a family heirloom, that Holocaust ring I was mentioning earlier. So this escalating legal warfare did not look good for Wendi. And she was obviously very scared of what was coming down the pike because there was motions for contempt. Contempt can put you in jail. And so this was something that you also probably wouldn't be able to hold a job as a FSU law professor if you're found in contempt. Okay, next we have number 15. Wendi applied for a new school for the boys there in Tallahassee without even conferring with Dan Gass, asking his input whatsoever. His knowledge was not even, he was not aware of this. And it only was sprung on him after the boys had been accepted through some kind of like a raffle wheel type of thing. And I submit that the jury will see this as a diversion on Wendi's part to make it look like Tallahassee was their home for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, you also square that with what Jeff Lacasse was saying, that Wendi is saying that she was cleaning up her bedroom at her parents' house 1 to 2 weeks before the murder. So on one hand, she's acting like she wants to stay in Tallahassee a long time. But on the other hand, she's making other steps down there to what it looked like she could make a move. So is there some foreknowledge there? A jury's going to be looking at that and being very suspicious when they see all these other indicators and their cumulative makeup together. So let's go ahead on to number 16. When he tells of Charlie's 2013 murder plot to Jeff Lacasse just 5 days before the murder, and she told him, in essence, that Charlie had explored all options to take care of the problem and looking into having Dan Markel, the professor, killed. So that was something really chilling, and Jeff really didn't know how to take that. Pretty shocking that he should just blurt that out. It wasn't any kind of discussion that would appear normal. That so to mention that is quite revealing, and maybe she's already trying to lead some breadcrumbs. So Jeff could point the finger at her brother. That would also support her pointing the finger at her brother as well. So I'm sure Charlie was fuming mad when he found out this is what his sister was saying to Jeff Lacasse right before he was able to help secure the hitmen. Excuse me. So number 17, Jeff had informed Wendi that he'd be leaving Tallahassee. He was heading up to Tennessee, and she wanted to know the details of when he was leaving, and he was saying he was leaving around 11 o'clock on the 18th of July, almost the exact time of Dan's murder. And keep in mind, Wendi was the only source for this information to be passed on, if it was in fact considered by the hitman. We don't know if it was. That was a question that never came up. But it could have been something where the hitman didn't know about the prompting. But keep in mind, they did know that Dan was getting ready to leave town and that they need to get this done by that Friday. So what kind of coincidence is that? In murder cases, there are no coincidences. All this is very telling. For indicator 18, we have on 13 July, Wendi said in response to, "Will you ever leave Miami?" She said that she could only leave Tallahassee if something happened to Dan. And yet Dan was killed 5 days later, and Wendi moved to Miami 3 days after that. Consider the odd timing of that. Is that really a coincidence? You consider this with all these other indicators, and this looks like there's stuff that's being revealed that is just too coincidence in nature, and it also is sort of eerie in nature as well. Okay, here we go for 19. Wendi spent time walking with her friend Jane during the last week Dan was alive, despite claiming that she had laryngitis that kept her from speaking with Dan for that whole week. And wouldn't even talk to him about the upcoming changes schedule for the boys. And so that was, I think, a very telling thing that she was not having any interest in talking to Dan, even with the great news about the boys getting enrolled and accepted or eligible to be enrolled in that private school that she'd applied for. So why is that Wendi was not wanting to talk to Dan that week? She only reached out to him after around 11 o'clock when it looked like Dan was not going to be able to survive because he was already gunned down in his garage at that point. So did she know something about that happening at that time? Is that a coincidence? Next, we have for 20 on Monday, July 14th. Things were good until 3 p.m. with Jeff, but the relationship really weird and sour after around a 7 p.m. yoga session. When separating after the yoga session, about 10 spaces away, Wendi was pressing Jeff Lacasse for the exact time he'd be leaving on Friday, that Friday the 18th, the day that Dan Markel was shot. And this looks like is proof of framing of Jeff Lacasse, the prime suspect. Jeff said that, look, I thought this thing was over, the way she's acting weird. He was like ready to give up on it. She said, leave me alone. And so this looks like some kind of setup. This yo-yo setup and then punching Dan away, telling him not to respond for a week. Very, very odd timing again. And here it is where I mentioned the 4 days before the hit on Dan, she didn't want any contact with Jeff Lacasse. Why such strict firmness? Why not say, hey, I could use some breathing room? But no, she sends them a message saying, do not contact me for 1 week. But then again, why need any breathing room at all? So Jeff was really disheartened, and he thought it was over at that point. She was acting so strange. For 22, Wendi, while with the boys, intentionally avoided Dan, seeing him at a Whole Foods. They're eating, and this was 2 days before the murder. So she intentionally avoided him. And so what happened to her laryngitis that week? She was able to do other stuff, yet she doesn't want to have the boys see Dan, doesn't want to run into Dan. So she saw Dan. Apparently Dan didn't see her. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have came out and said something to want to see the boys again. So anyways, just a really an eerie thing again that looks suspicious and just doesn't, it's just not going to sit right with a jury when they're looking at this. For 23, Wendi changed her Facebook profile a day before the murder, and she went from being a mom of 2 kids to being single. And as Jeff Lacasse said, it was like a Photoshop of the photo of her. So it's really odd timing again. Very strange timing of why would you change your photo right before? Is this something you're thinking maybe the news will try to snag? And so you want to have a better picture of you, more flattering. So it's just something that really makes you wonder. It's like, why would you do that? And I think it helps show the suspicious behavior that will cumulatively help a jury realize that, you know what, there's no way that all this is just a harmless coincidence. For number 24, Wendi mentions Charlie's TV's cheaper than a hitman joke to the Geek Squad technician only a few hours before the murder. He showed up around 8:20 in the morning, and so she's going to mention a hitman that morning, that a hitman actually does show up to gun down Dan Markel. And she makes various phone calls that morning, even talks to somebody overseas. All these things which look like as they're trying to serve as an alibi. And apparently suddenly her week-long laryngitis had cleared up. So what's up with that? And the TV, as you'll see through this case, the TV was the code for the family code for the murder of Dan Markel. So when they mention the TV, they know that they're talking about the murder plot. So this whole thing about TV cheaper than Hitman was something that's just so awkwardly brought out and so crazily set up, is like, this is what how we're gonna talk about it in code. And and they have the Geek Squad guy show up there to fix a broken screen. Really? It's just so I think revealing a really bad plot. And it's just not the way normal people act. Normal people, even back in 2014, they're not going to call a Geek Squad out to fix a cracked screen. Now let's look at the phone activity there for that morning. Look at all this activity with Wendi. First of all, if you look at Charlie and Katie McBanwell, I mean, they're up in the middle of the night. They're having contacts. They're even talking at 1:03 in the morning for 23 minutes. And then at 8:09, Donna's reaching out to Wendi. Wendi then texts Charlie, but the text is then deleted. That's the one where she said, "This is so sweet." We'll get to that here in a minute. And then Dan, you see he drops off his children at 8:50. Then he tries to contact Wendi at 9:02, but yet her ringer is turned off. And then Wendi then has a few minutes later is reaching out to Charlie, talking to him over 18 minutes about a broken screen and whether she should repair or replace it. It was obvious she just needs to get rid of that broken TV and get a new one. It wasn't an expensive TV. So this is a timeline going on here, and like I say, it's definitely showing that Wendi had some kind of connection to this flurry of phone calls between Charlie and the people that were uh, responsible for the hit, and the middleman, which was Katie McBanois. Number 26, that's the one I mentioned here. Look at this. This is what we learned at the last trial. We'd not heard about this in any previous trial. When he sent Charlie this message, "This is so sweet," at 8:20. Why would she say that? "This is so sweet"? What would she talk about? And why would it be deleted? Very, very suspicious behavior. I think this is really probably one of the top 10 indicators, top 15 indicators. And then we see here that Wendi managed to hold this Geek Squad technician at her house for almost 40 minutes, all to evaluate a non-repairable screen, cracked screen. Or does it look like someone is being stalled to try to get them to stay longer to increase their window for an alibi? How do you think the jury's going to look at this? You think they're going to think this is just a normal type visitation of a Geek Squad member for a cracked screen? Who's held up a guy there for 40 minutes for a cracked screen? That would be like a 1-minute conversation. All right, next we have number 28. Wendi had left her ringer off her phone when Dad tried to call. Why would a mother of 2 preschool age boys leave her cell phone ringer off? Why would that be the case? You did not have the custody of the boys right then. Dan did, and they're supposed to be dropped off at school. So why wouldn't you right away pick up? Why would you have your ringer off? And why wouldn't you call Dan back right away before calling Charlie about the cracked screen? So what's more important, the cracked screen or wanting to make sure the boys got dropped off at school and where everything was okay? Number 29, this one is the most critical indicator. This is the most revealing indicator. And I think for anybody on any jury, they're going to look at this and go, you know what? Just like Charlie said, what are the odds? Charlie even said it's like 1 in a million that Wendi would drive by the crime scene shortly after Dan was shot and gunned down in this garage. So this is such a huge thing here that this is going to really, really help carry the day for the prosecution and have them meet that standard of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's look at this. Trescott was not on the way to the liquor store. So if you look at where other liquor stores were at, you look at this dotted line, red line at the top of the screen here, this little window. That's the way she could have gone to go to lunch at Mosaics. And there's multiple liquor stores all around there. That's a simple way she could have taken. Instead, what she does is take this purple route, which is way out of the way. It's like 40 minutes out of the way. And then she comes down over here to go to Trescott, right? But then it was blocked off. She drove, and she didn't originally say she went all the way to Trescott to the house where the crime scene table was. Then she hurried up, turned around, and went all the way back to Trescott to Centerville. Then took a right on Centerville and drove on down. And then she goes back to this ABC Wine and Spirits and goes there. Who would do that? If you lived up there at Aqua Ridge Way, why would you drive all the way down and even take Trescott, which is not a shortcut? You're going through a residential area that has speed bumps. There's no sidewalks. There's tons of tropical foliage. It's really dense, thick vegetation along the roads there. It's not good visibility. There's a lot of families with young kids there. It's summertime. You would not take that as a shortcut at all because you have to go so slow. You just instead, even if it was a shortcut, you'd do anything to avoid Trescott. You would take Centerville and then cut across that other route here to get where the white flag is there, or noting where the ABC Wine and Spirits is located. So anyway, it's definitely not a shortcut, and this is another real red flag to support her her testimony that she's saying this is a shortcut. It supports it that it's not, and it really shows that she calling this a shortcut was never brought up to Isom. Is like, and Isom was like, that's a shortcut, and why are you saying you got to go to ABC Liquor? There's many other liquors up there near where you live there in Aqua Ridge. So that was never brought up, and she was never challenged on that beforehand. She has been challenged on this Trescott, this direction on. She keeps on changing how far she got down Trescott. So let's go look at this. For indicator 31, if you look at this route on Trescott here, this is more of a closer view of the route she took on Trescott that day. That is a 0.9 mile route to go all the way down to Dan's house. So she got up to the house next door where the red tape, or the crime scene tape was. So she saw police cars, multiple police cars, crime scene tape. And so she also then changed her testimony later on to say she didn't turn on Trescott at all. And then she makes another statement saying, she made a K-turn after attempting to turn on Trescott. So she's completely backtracking, making all this 1.8 mile round trip route to go down Trescott. So this looks like totally a crime scene inspection. That's what it looks like. That's what a jury's going to look at this to go, you know what? That's what this is about. So I'm gonna tell you that this route that John and I took back when we went to Charlie's trial. This is when you look at Centerville here versus it's not Belton Road. You would never go all this out of your way to go to ABC Liquor. Even if you would, the last thing you want to do is go down Trescott. You'd go Centerville onto Benton or Belton, however you pronounce it. I think it's Benton. So this is not a shortcut by any means, and it begs the question: why would you go 40 minutes out of your way? And even if you're going 40 minutes out of your way, you go through narrow streets, curved streets with all the foliage and whatnot. And you're saying you're trying to take a shortcut? That's just not credible whatsoever. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping around here. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one here, 32. Luis Rivera. He was one of the hitmen. He drove up there with Sigfredo Garcia. He would later testify that when he called Katie McBanois to say the job is done, she replied, "I know." So how would Katie know the job is done if she's down there in Miami? Well, we do know that Wendi went to the crime scene there. So we don't have all their WhatsApp messages and whatnot, their ways of communication. So how would Katie know the job was done when it wasn't even on the news yet? It was not even on the news yet. So how would Katie know that? Consider the source. Okay, for 33, Wendi was the only person who could have let Katie know that a hit was successful prior to the hitman calling Katie themselves. That's what's really strange about this whole thing is there's no other way that could have possibly happened. There's none. It was not in the news. To get that information that fast to Katie, it doesn't make any sense other than the fact that somebody that had connections with an Adelson made that connection down to Miami there. Who's better to make that inspection than who we know showed up there, which is Wendi Adelson. All right, next we have 34. When later questioned whether he'd gotten any information about Markel's schedule or address from the blog, Rivera replied, the blog was Wendi, and that was something that made the jury laugh in Charlie's case because he didn't know what a blog was. This is like a Latin King member. He's never had any kind of formal education in the United States. And so it was, he knew this was about Wendi. And so he's not somebody that is sophisticated enough to know to look at Dan Markel's Prost blog to figure out what his schedule is. Even if he says he's going to be in New York City, it's not going to say when he's at different locations in Tallahassee, either at his house or at the gym or at school. So in any case, this is something that helps show the fact that the hitman went up there thinking he's going to take care of Wendy's situation there. This is a massive indicator here. Wendy didn't check on Dan or the kid's safety when she saw the police roadblock near Dan's home. This is taken from a local TV station there. So that yellow tape is across one of the like telephone poles, light poles there on that street. And that squad car is in front of Dan's driveway. So that's how close she got to Dan's house. And she initially admitted she got that close, but then she tried to say, no, the entire route of Trescott was blocked off. That whole 0.9 miles was blocked off. And that was never the case. That was never the case at all. But so far, she's keeps waffling, and she knows why she wants to backtrack and not say she got that close, because people like you and me are asking these questions. Why didn't you do anything to check on the kids? You see crime scene tape and police cars and multiple vehicles from law enforcement in the driveway of Dan Markel's house, and you don't stop to say, hey, what's going on here? That doesn't raise some kind of chilling reaction. Oh my gosh, what happened to Dan? The boys were there that night. Are they okay? No, just turn around, get out of there. Nobody in their right mind would do that. Nobody whatsoever. So this one, along with going there to begin with, a lot of people are saying, well, maybe she was meant to go there and to find Dan and then be the one to call 911, and the police weren't supposed to be there. So that could have been even a better alibi in their thinking, right? So we don't know what the details of that are, but it's just too much of a coincidence, isn't it? This is number 36. This is when he wore an owl shirt the day of the hit of Dan, which is a sign of death. These owl figures in some cultures, and then also in Jewish culture, it's like a form of women's liberation. Now, we did look at the fact that the owl is a mascot in Wendy's undergrad, but they have a cartoonish type of owl. So there's not really a cartoonish type of owl, but could this be an indicator? It's not a very strong indicator, but some people on the jury could think, you know what, this is sort of foretelling again. It's another form of foretelling, just like the book. Number 37, Luis Rivera would later testify that he was told by Secretary Fredo Garcia that the motive for the murder was that the lady wants to get her 2 kids back. So is this something that was passed on from Wendi onto the family and emphasized for the family to pass on? Or was this something that the family did for Wendi? But they're speaking about the fact that Wendi wants her 2 kids back. So in other words, Wendi is authorized this. Wendy's requesting this. This is to benefit Wendi. Number 38, Wendi didn't freak out when Detective Isom showed up at her public lunch at Mosaics with her friends there, and she agreed to be brought back to the police station in a police car all the way back without even knowing why she's being brought in for questioning. And I submit that there's no way a lawyer would ever agree to get in a car, a squad car, without being told why beforehand. She didn't mention at that time about seeing cops at Trescott until several minutes into the interview back at the police station. So think about it. He just left in front of Dan's house, all these squad cars, crime scene tape, and the cops are going to grab you at your luncheon and ask you to come with them back to the police station, and you're not freaking out saying, hey, this has to do with that house. I just came to the house. What's going on? Are the kids okay? Is Dan okay? So even if Dan said, excuse me, even if Detective Isom said the kids are okay, there's no way you would just sit there and agree to get in the squad car without knowing, why am I being called down there? Is Dan okay? Right? None of that happened. And then number 39, when she's interviewed by Detective Isom, and right in the very beginning of the interview, he's telling her that, Dan has been shot and he's not going to make it. If you look at her reaction, it's completely bypassing all these normal states of grief. She went to a straight bypassing of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and went straight to acceptance. Straight to acceptance. Why would she go straight to acceptance? Why did she not go into denial and ask all kinds of details? So it's very odd. Yeah, I agree here. Dalai Lama, Wendi was dressed completely out of character for meeting her friends at Mosaic. I mean, is that normal? I'd find out if that's normal kind of dress that she has. I call it like a gardening type of outfit. You'd wear that outfit if you're going to garden out back in your yard. So I think this is very telling. And you know what? Was she really crying? I submit that she wasn't crying. Those weren't really tears. She covered her face a lot. I find that when people are fake and crying and they know that you can tell there's no tears or watery eyes, they'll basically cover their face a lot, put their head down. So that's what we saw a lot for her. Yeah, and here number 40, Wendy's crying sounded more like relief than grief. Listen to that. Every time you listen to it more and more, it sounds like relief, not any grief. Where did she have any grief in the days, months, years after that? You never see any. You never see anything but that seething hatred of Dan Markel. If I was a prosecutor, I'd ask her, well, tell us good things about Dan Markel. She's just like, oh, she'd be steaming mad. You could tell that the hatred come out even more. Okay, 41. We have Wendi didn't mention or pursue her kids' welfare when hearing about the shooting during the police interview. She first mentioned the kids 20 minutes into the interview. Even if Detective Isom mentioned this is not about your kids, wouldn't she press for details about Dan's injuries? For example, wouldn't she wonder, did the boys see their father being gunned down? What time did this happen? Where was Dan shot? What the details? Where was he shot at? Were there any witnesses? What have you caught the guys yet? Did you see a getaway car? What, for example, how do you even know this was a targeted killing? Was this a robbery gone wrong? Did he have his wallet on him? Were they trying to steal stuff out of the house? What, we don't know any details. If you're in Wendy's shoes, you don't know any details. So why would you not ask all these kind of details if you're in the denial stage of learning some tragic news? And there's no concern either to get the boys out of daycare yourself. And say, I'll talk to you later, Detective Isom. So you say I'm not a suspect. So I'm leaving now, Detective Isom. We'll talk later. We'll talk tomorrow. I got to get my life in order here and try to protect my boys. When they find out their dad's going to be no longer with them, I mean, why don't they get up to the hospital there? Also, during the Detective Isom interview, she slipped up and said Monroe. She mentioned Monroe twice instead of Thomasville. Or was she saying Monroe instead of Mosaic, that restaurant that we have noted here on the map? Think about this. Monroe is where the Hitman's Hotel was. Monroe is all the way down here on this image on the bottom left. So where you see this little Y in the road above where it's written Monroe, that's where Monroe ends and Thomasville begins. So ABC Liquors is all the way up there on Thomasville near Benton. And so why would she use the word Monroe? Monroe's not near any of these things. So was that a slip up? That's incriminating to her. That's something the prosecution should bring out. This is her reaction when she's talking about different things. Look at the way here she's covering her eyes. Why is she trying to hide her eyes like that? Covering her mouth. 43, Wendy's reaction to the news that Dan was still alive elicited no elation or urge to be at his side, to call his rabbi or friends. Instead, she just calls it a game changer. a game changer. Like, hey, my plans are being interrupted. What's going on here? That's not good news. Very strange behavior. Yeah, Spencer B. The fact that she replaced her cell phone immediately, thinking that police put a bug in her cell phone, that was a massive red flag to you. Yeah, that should be brought out as well because you know what? Who changes their cell phone number if they're not involved in something? Why would the police be wiretapping her line? And if they did, what's there to hide? Let them hear you, how upset you are, how devastating this is for the boys. Yeah, there's definitely a charm offensive going on there in talking to the victim advocate as well. All right, next we have 44. Wendi failed to phone Dan's parents to inform them of the shooting. They were denied a chance. Don't know if they would have succeeded being up in Canada, but they were denied the chance to rush to his side. How cruel is that? She says she doesn't have any of their contact info, wasn't helpful in any way to try to get that contact info. You're telling me she couldn't mention Dan's friends that might have had the contact info, or she couldn't have told them, hey, look on Facebook, send them a message on Facebook. None of that. There's no really concerted effort to make sure the wonderful Markel parents were having a chance to rush down there. All right, 45. Wendy was very hesitant to call Donna while on the speakerphone at the investigator's office, the police station there. She appeared strangely calm, and the whole conversation seemed very scripted. Go back and listen to Wendy's call to her mom. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's very, very odd interview, as well as a strange call she made. Next, we have 46. Wendy said she was relieved that her parents, plural, sounded surprised. Why was she relieved that her parents sounded surprised? So she acts like she suspected them of killing Dan, but because they acted surprised, no, now they're off the target list of people you got to interview and flush out as suspects. But she had only spoken to Donna. So why is she trying to say for this call to her mom that she can relate that both her parents were surprised? She didn't talk to Harvey, so how does she know Harvey's surprised? Okay, next we have 47. As a lawyer, Wendy would have expected her phone to be searched as a prime suspect. So she consented to the search, but had ample time before that to prepare. A full scan of her phone was never performed. We found that out here recently that according to what the prosecution office informed the defense counsel, there was never a full 100% scan of Wendy's cell phone. So again, it's just shoddy police work. And think about this. She lawyered up after a 5-hour interview, and before heading back and getting back to Miami, she already had a lawyer lined up. So is she grieving or is she running to find a defense lawyer? Number 48, Wendy appeared rehearsed throughout the interview, instantly crying, or at least I think it's fake crying. No shocked reaction, no questions about the details of Dan's injury, whether he was conscious or not, etc. None of those. There's no denials, no shock, no real crying, I don't think at all. Yeah, she said there's a bad connection when they tried calling her on Monday. Hey, we'd like you to come in for a follow-up interview. And she goes, oh, there's a bad connection, hung up. And the next thing you know, her lawyer's calling back saying, hey, I'm retained counsel. So, so before she can get to Miami, she's got a lawyer calling up the police saying, hey, don't talk to Wendy anymore. How bizarre is that? Is that something that sounds like somebody wants to get the hitman pursued to the full extent of the law? Or does that sound like somebody's worrying about police finding out about their involvement in the crime? 49, Wendy told Detective Eisen that due to having laryngitis, she hadn't talked to Dan that week, the week of the murder, about their disputed school choices for the boys. Well, who else did she talk to that week? She surely had no problems talking Friday afternoon to Detective Eisen. She was there for 5 hours. So you think her laryngitis, she just got over it, that she would have not been so chatty with Detective Isom, but it looks like her main goal was to get Isom to agree with her that she was not a suspect. And once she got him once she's picking up the vibes that she's not a suspect, then that's her chance to go to the next stage, which is get your lawyer involved and have nothing more to do with these Yahoo country bumpkin folks there in Tallahassee. Number 50, Wendi brought up the idea that someone may have done this for her, implying that Dan was so awful he deserved that. I don't think she really thought this one through. When you're going to say somebody did this to help you because Dan was such a nasty person and they were doing this to alleviate your suffering from Dan being that nasty of a horrible person. It makes no sense. It's such a weird statement to make. So there she is throwing other people under the bus, all this massive deflection going on. Should have made Isom realize, hey, wait a minute, this is really weird. Why is she not asking about this? Was this a robbery? Or why would you think somebody's targeting Dan? That should be the least thing you're thinking, that he's got targeted by someone. Very, very strong indicator here. She was never worried about finding out or suspecting that this was a random violent act here of someone. 51, Wendi never brought up or entertained the idea that could have been a random act of violence or a botched robbery. It started as, okay, I just said that. So this goes into 51. And this is a standalone one that is so critical for, I think, the prosecution to bring this out and argue this. So it was never mentioned at all in her 5-hour interview with Isom or in her discussion with the victim advocate. Because think about it, if it's targeted, that gives her justification to flee Tallahassee. Hey, I could be next, right? Where if it's random, it's like, well, they don't know who they shot. They're just trying to rob some guy that was in his garage. But think about it. She didn't even know where he got shot at. Didn't know where on his person he got shot. She didn't know where at the house he got shot. Was it in the yard? But yet she says, when she's telling other people, she says Dan got shot in the house. How would she know he got shot in the house? Isom never told her that. 52, Isom says to Wendi, do you think someone would do this to your benefit? Wendi says no. And she never denies that this benefits her. And then Isom says, what good does it serve? And that's not ever answered by Wendi. So really, really odd thing for her to say. Benefit? How's this benefiting me? The boys lost their dad. Are you kidding me? How dare you think that? But you know what? She's the one that brought it up. Somebody might have done this for her benefit. So why is it benefit? Why is Dan so bad of a person that some would think he's deserving to be murdered? It's just so whacked out type of thinking. The jury isn't gonna be fooled by any of this type of behavior. All these indicators, I'm telling you, jurors will pick up on, and they're going to see it for what it is. Number 53, Wendi tested her efforts to frame Jeff and deflect from her by saying, it sounds crazy when I talk about Jeff this way. The victim advocate would then say, well, I don't think so. So she's leaving all these kind of breadcrumbs and test balloons to find out exactly how am I playing this out with the victim advocate. '54, Wendi told Detective Isom that she thinks the murder should be fully punished unless it's a family member. Yet then she in court denied she ever said that. And the prosecution never did anything to prove that up, but that's what she said. We saw her on tape. 55, Dan died 5 to 6 hours after Wendi's police interview ended, but Wendi never went to go visit him. Never had any interest. Just wanted to get on and do other things that were more important to her than going up there and having family with Dan as he's dying. Family is what mattered, not Not just some friends, which are wonderful to have up there, but he deserved to have some family up there, even if they're not there to see him, but just to be at the hospital and just to know that he's not going to die alone in a hospital without family there. So that's just another shameful, cruel thing. 56, when he talked about a hitman to 3 different people during the last week of Dan's life. She talked to Jeff Lacasse about it. And that was a serious attempt back in 2013. Then you look at the Geek Squad technician. She mentioned the so-called joke of the TV cheaper than a hitman. And then she's bringing it up again here to Detective Isom. So all these times within just a few days of each other, all this stuff about a hitman is coming out. And guess what? The murder was in fact carried out by a hitman. So is that a coincidence? You really think that's a coincidence? $57. Killing Dan turned Wendi into a trust fund baby. That's what Charlie himself said. We heard on these wiretap calls. And he said she never earned this. She was suddenly free to evacuate to Miami with the boys with a new revenue stream. She was getting $4,800 a month back then. For the boys, it's probably $2,000 or maybe $1,500 more than that now for the 2 boys that she gets from Social Security. So far, we estimate it's over 1.5 million she's received from the government, from Social Security. Unbelievable. Next, we have 58. Wendi called Dan's life insurance company just a few days after the murder, wanting to find out about the policy, but yet you square that with her being too upset to eat for the first couple weeks. Which is it? If you're so upset about Dan's murder, why would you even be thinking about that? Why would you want to know about that? Then look at this on 59. Wendi tried to claim the GoFundMe set up by Tamara Demko based on her widow status, and from what the reports were, she did get the funds. So, really, you're needing to make sure you get the funds set up by a friend of yours and Dan's. You want to make sure you get that when it wasn't set up by you, and it was to help the boys. Why are you trying to go over and claim it? So it's just really a bad look all the way around. Think about this, indicator 60. All litigation stopped cold once Dan was killed. Everything that she was about to lose, potentially her job, potentially trouble with state bar, have to pay more court costs, maybe face jail time, which is one of the sanctions you can get for being held in contempt of court. And guess what? All these legal bombs never made it before the judge after that. She was able to skip town and nobody's there to enforce anything. Dan wasn't alive to have his attorney fight. He was no longer a party to the lawsuit because he was murdered. Dawn would never have to worry about supervised visitations with her sunshines. She would never have to testify and say, "No, I never said that Dan was stupid in front of the boys." As a mother, Wendi had zero interest in finding out who murdered her kid's father. She defiantly told the jury, "It's not her job, not my job to help solve this case. For the sake of your boys, you should be calling up the cops on a regular basis saying, 'Where are you at? What are the latest leads? I want to know what's happening. You need to nail these people responsible.'" You know what? She took off out of town and doesn't want anything to do with the police to find out those kind of details. Why is that? This thing here is such a dagger to show the hatred of Dan Markel. Wendi denied the Markel grandparents and family access to the boys over a 6-year gap at one point. And most of their lives or lives since Dan's been murdered they've not seen much of anything of the surviving family, Markel family up there in Canada. Even when they come to visit, it's supervised and maybe for 90 minutes. And it's just unbelievable that that the Markells would have to go through this kind of suffering that way. So this here, I think the jury needs to know about. It came out in the last trial. They brought it out through the FBI agent that visitation was very limited. Because when he testified and said that the Markells have unfettered access to the boys, and yet they've never been alone with them. And they've never seen their father's gravesite up in Canada. It is extreme cruelty. Wendi misled the court on why she allowed no visits to the boys by the Markells, falsely claimed that they attempted to put the boys in foster care when it had only been discussed in the context of Wendy's potential arrest. In other words, Ruth Markel had sent an email, and that was sent to Georgia, who basically the discussion had to do with, in the event Wendy's arrested, can they initially place them in some kind of foster care there, some kind of Jewish foster care service that is there in the local Miami area. And that's all it was. And you know what? Wendy's using that as an excuse to say, well, I can't trust the boys around any of the Markells. But that's there's nothing abnormal about how Ruth was trying to make sure the boys just wouldn't get shipped out to anywhere until they could arrive down there on the first flight down there in the event Wendi was arrested. All right, 64. Wendi gave contradictory testimony during the trials, claiming it had been a normal divorce, not too contentious. But you look at the legal filings, there's like over 800 pages in that court file. Dan's legal filings were not too big a deal for her parents. According to her, losing the motion to relocate the kids was not a big deal either, like as if she liked living in Tallahassee. Yet she spends a couple $100,000 trying to fight Dan and try to get the kids permanently relocated down there to Miami. And she downplayed that there was any benefits to her from Dan's murder. Yet all the problems with Dan were instantly removed once the murder happened. So who was the main benefactor of Dan's murder? 65. During Katie McBanoir's trial, when discussing Wendy's immunity, Tara Kwas asked, so that means anything you can say today can't be used against you if the state decides to arrest you later on. And Wendi, with a big smile, said, the state is not going to arrest me. And this is her face here right before she answered that. So if the state isn't going to arrest you, how do you know that? Why are you so sure of that? And if you're so sure they're not going to arrest you, why you have an attorney there in the room with you every time you testify? Why you have an attorney fighting you being subpoenaed to the hitman's deposition request? You had your lawyer fight it all the way up to the appellate courts to try to prevent you from being subpoenaed. Don't you want to cooperate and help the folks responsible for the murder of your boy's father get them prosecuted to the full extent of the law? Why wouldn't you cooperate? So again, there's a constant pattern here. All these indicators really paint a good picture. Then you look at Wendy's body language and mannerisms throughout her trial testimonies. They've been full of indications of deceptions. Any kind of time there's a big zinger question that's asked of her by Georgia, where it really can reveal something incriminating, guess what? She squeezes her eyes. That's a telltale sign I notice. She squeezes her eyes shut like this for a couple seconds while she's answering. 67, Jeff Lacasse said he wouldn't have left for Tennessee. If he would have left for Tennessee a day earlier, he would have been close to Dan's house at the time of the murder, and he could have easily been the fall guy for the Adelsons to point the finger at if they were ever accused. So think how much Wendi suggested Jeff Lacasse as being the prime suspect. She acts like she had no clue it could be Jeff, but then Jane is the one that comes in there and talks about how, oh, you got to look at Jeff Lacasse. He's really jealous. 68, Wendi never reached out to Jeff Lacasse for support, either for herself or the boys after murder. Why is that? You said you just need a week off, and yet you don't reach out to him for any kind of support. After all, he's a professional counselor. He's got a PhD. All this stuff. He knows your boys. So the boys lost both their dad, and Jeff Lacasse was heavily involved in their lives, all within days of each other. I mean, how cruel is that? 69. When Wendi changed the boys' names from Markel to Adelson, she indicated on the court form that the names were reverting back to their original name, as if they originally were named Adelsons. No, their original name was Markel. You were changing it to Adelson, so that form was incorrectly filled out. Was that an effort to mislead the court to make sure you got this request granted? Think of number 70. Wendi disinvited Dan's parents, Phil and Ruth, to the bar mitzvah after Charlie was arrested for murder. You're only punishing the boys by doing that, Wendi. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? If Charlie was arrested, maybe you should start thinking, gosh, if my brother's behind this, I really have been wrongfully denying visitation to Phil and Ruth and Shelley. I need the boys to allow that have that connection with the Markel family tree. 71 at Katie's second trial on her retrial, because the first was a hung jury, one jury held out just because they didn't want to convict somebody that had that both parents of two kids were going to go down on murder. So that's why they didn't want to convict this one person. Didn't want to convict Katie. So, but it's Katie's second trial. Jeff Lacasse said of Wendi, I find her to be a deeply deceitful person and not great at it. And Wendi played me with lots of love bombing and manipulating. So Jeff Lacasse, he's going to testify again to this case that he felt extremely manipulated, that Wendi was completely stringing him along, setting him up, trying to mess with his mind, trying to get him totally thinking that she's in love with him, they have a future together, and then, at the drop of a hat, suddenly she's cold. She doesn't want to talk to him and say, hey, get away from me. So really, really strange behavior. And it really supports this notion that supports Jeff's beliefs that it looks like I was being set up to take the blame. 72. This is a small indicator, but it's sort of revealing, I think, when Jeff says that when he used to talk about Charlie's Ferrari, and yet she claims ignorance of the cars when she's talking in court. And yet Detective Isom, she mentions how Charlie has a police car. But she wouldn't mention any other kind of vehicle he drives to Isom. She just mentioned, oh, yeah, he drives a police car. Like, in other words, he's a law-abiding citizen. He's all about pro-police, pro-law and order. No, I don't think so. Why didn't you mention the Ferrari that he was driving? Why didn't you mention the Maestro license plates he had on? ABGB, I've said that before. Jeff doesn't seem like one of these types. That's another indicator. All right, next we have 73. Given Charlie's overwhelming guilt, what uncle would kill their nephew's dad without consulting his sister, which is their mother, first? His sister would be the prime suspect, make headlines, etc. This would radically change his sister's life. So would Charlie, or anybody for that matter, someone loyal to Wendi, do that on her behalf without her approval when her son's lives would be forever traumatized? That's a question that comes up a lot. How do you think the jury's going to look at that? Number 74, Wendi never contacted her and Dan's mutual friend Tamara Demko, Dan's law school buddy, after the murder. Tamara had to show up unannounced at Wendi's house. And oh, by the way, while there, Tamara noticed that Harvey would completely avoid eye contact with her. She had seen and talked to Harvey a number of times before that. And suddenly, after Dan Markells murdered, he completely wants to avoid eye contact with this person. So what's that tell you? 75, Dr. Mia Greenberg was texted by Wendi to show up to the memorial and arrive early to help. Yet the Greenbergs never became friends of Wendi, but Dan and Sons were friends of Dr. Greenberg's and their boys. So compare that with Tamara Demko. She was not even invited despite being friends with Dan and Wendi and having met Harvey and Donna several times. So where is there that disconnect? Is it because Tamara would have insights and be able to to see things about Wendy's behavior that Wendi was maybe self-conscious about. Okay, 76, we have Tamara Demko said, I don't think any of the Adelsons will be the ones that pull the trigger. They would be smart in putting the plan together, i.e. minimum ties to reveal Wendy's involvement. And then she said, Wendi is good at keeping things close to the chest and redirecting. So that's what she said to Detective Isom when she was interviewed. 77, Wendi testified that she couldn't recall how much money she had grabbed from their bank and investment accounts. That's not something you forget about, folks. If you're going through a divorce, you're going to know exactly how much money was left, how much you got, how much you didn't get. I mean, those are things that it's another small indicator just to go, you know what? She's not being straight up when she testifies in front of the jury. She's not going to be straight up and just tell you what it was. Think about this also. She testified she couldn't recall how much money she'd spent in attorney's fees for the custody battle. That's probably a couple $100,000 right there. So the more money she had spent fighting with Dan, the more it looked like she had a motive to like make this problem go away. Yeah, keep the chat clean, folks. We're not here to like talk smack and talk nasty about people. We're trying to have a legal discussion as if we're in front of a judge. So keep that in mind, please. 79, when Charlie asked Donna if the bump involved Wendi, Donna gets panicky and says no like 5 times to ensure Charlie shut down from going there, which shows like this is consistent with what we heard Donna say, which is they've gone to great lengths to protect Wendi. So that was something that came up on jail calls, that Donna was pretty mad at Wendi for not asking about how Charlie's doing. And she said that she was been telling Wendi, you know, we've done a lot to look out for you, or words to that effect. So yeah, this is another indicator that that they're doing exactly what Donna said, which they've done a lot to look out and protect Wendi. Number 80, Wendi wore the exact same dress at both of Katie McBanwell's trials 3 years apart. Could this be a calculating move to make the YouTube audience think all are the same, part of the same trial, and not to view and compare? This is a very minor point, extremely minor. But you know what? Some people look at this. I've seen a number of comments, and people say, you know what? That is really strange that somebody would dress the exact same way for both trials. Why would somebody do that? Does she really have that shortage of clothes in her closet? Or is this what this says here? Could this be a calculating move? Number 81, although Wendi begrudgingly agreed to Georgia Kaplan's proposition that the boys were Dan's world, she quickly followed up with, but also his work. So it's the boys are Dan's world, but also his work, in an attempt to downplay his love for his children. So that's the kind of way she's always trying to like make digs at Dan and diminish all the good things about him. 82, Wendi has only been the only witness in the past 2 Dan Markel murder trials being forced to testify under subpoena with immunity protection and her own lawyer present. This is extremely rare for supposed victims. I can't recall any time a victim, surviving member of a family that or somebody's murdered, that they need to testify under immunity, and they're claiming their innocence, yet they need immunity protection. And then you got to have a lawyer present. You spend probably a couple $100,000 in that. How are you a victim? Do you see yourself as a victim, or do you see yourself as a suspect? It really looks like you consider yourself as a suspect. And again, if you say you're not going to be arrested by the state and you're laughing about it, why would you need a lawyer? Number 83, Wendi, after being asked by George Kaplan why she and Dan moved from Miami to Tallahassee a second time, she said, Dan had tried to get a job in Miami and it didn't work out. What Wendi omits is the fact that they both tried to get that job there in Miami, and it was basically a trial basis. It was both of them or none of them type basis that they would have been hired. So this is in essence another dig at Dan. Like, Dan didn't meet the grade. But how do we know it wasn't Wendi that didn't meet the grade? They didn't want to hire Dan because of Wendi. They'd have to have a job for Wendi. 84, Georgia Kaplan asked Wendi, is your family in South Florida wealthy? Then Wendi stares straight ahead, no response. And then Georgia says, I know it's a relative term. And then Wendi, with a big smile looking happy, says, are you asking me to speculate? And then Georgia says, no, I'm asking you if they're wealthy. If you don't know, you don't know. I don't know why Georgia's giving it an easy out like that. And then Wendi goes on to say, it depends how you define wealthy. Really? They had $8 million collectively down there between the parents of Wendi and her brother. Georgia asks, are they millionaires? And then Wendi smiles and laughs, says, no, but closing both eyes again while shaking her head side to side. Holding both eyes shut is common when not telling the truth, not only for Wendi, but other people as well. So she knows they had a lot of money back then. They probably burned about $5 million in attorney's fees since then. For number 85, Georgia asked, was part of the reason for your disagreement or separation having to do with how you raise the children in terms of your faith? When he said yes, we had different ways of, and then she gave some kind of generic answer. So what she didn't say is like, yeah, he was extremely troubling to be around. He was a religious zealot. We couldn't stand his efforts to practice the faith much more strict than what we do. So yeah, that was one of the things that was in the emails referring to Dan as a religious zealot. So they mocked him. They mocked him for his faith. So that's something that Wendi didn't volunteer here. So she's very guarded in talking about that. Number 86, when Georgia asked, were your parents very involved in trying to facilitate that relocation? In other words, to South Florida, Wendi says, my parents were supportive of me moving to South Florida. That seemed like a canned answer. It's not directly answering how involved were your parents. So look at this as a misdirection. They were willing to put up $250,000 to make that move happen, and you're only going to say, oh, yeah, they're supportive. Why don't you just say, yeah, they were very involved, so much that they're willing to offer $250,000 along with my brother's $250,000. I only had to come up with $350,000, and my family's coming up with $250,000 to be able to pay off Dan if you'd agree to move to the Miami area. So again, all these little deflections and mistruths by not coming clean on all the details. Number 87, Georgia's asking, would you describe your parents as being over-involved in your personal business? Then Wendy's saying, compared to other people's parents, and then Georgia's saying, yeah. And then Wendi, while projecting this really innocent, soft-sounding voice, says, I don't think so. And yet, when you stop to think about it, Donna had selected Dan on JDate, which is a Jewish dating website. She pressed Wendi to divorce Dan. She also pressed for Wendi to dress up the boys in Hitler Youth to try to manipulate Dan to agree to move to Miami. She also suggested that there was this fake conversion of the boys to Christianity to try to pressure Dan to move to Miami. All this cruel stuff, really bizarre, strange, cruel stuff to try to force Dan back to Miami. So here she is saying, I don't think, though, that her parents are over involved in your personal business. Well, then why would they want to have Dan killed? Why are you saying they could possibly want to kill Dan if they weren't over involved? So which is it, Wendi? Number 88, Wendi never says she shot down Donna's Hitler Youth suggestions, and apparently kept feeding Donna information about Dan. Why else would they want to possibly be so angry at Dan that they want to kill him? Why would she have to mention them as possible suspects of this? Why would you say, Mom, you're like getting too angry about this whole kind of thing. I don't want to work you up. I'm going to keep you out of my private life dealing with Dan. We'll work it out in the courts. And I don't want to get you riled up and say such crazy talk. But you know what? She never, from what we saw, made any kind of rejection of those outlandish emails Donna sent. Number 89, Wendi appealed the court subpoena for a defense counsel requested deposition in the Bank Banois trial, and she won in both the trial and appellate courts. Wendi had claimed the deposition was a due form of harassment, yet she spent all that time and effort on attorney's fees to resist the motions and appeals by the defense counsel. Her testimony is already shrouded in immunity, so why would she resist? Now, she didn't have immunity if the defense called her, but why was she so worried about immunity, and why would she spend all that money? Think about all that effort she made to have her attorney fight it up to the appellate level. She only was able to avoid the deposition because a technicality, the judges said that no, that could be an issue at a different juncture in the trial. So it's only on a technicality that she wasn't able to, that she was able to be avoiding testimony there. But you know what? In another subsequent deposition request, she did wind up testifying, but it was so limited, she wound up pleading the fifth over and over again. I mean, it seemed like 100 times she pled the fifth. So why would you plead the fifth if you got nothing to hide and you want these people that they found to be the trigger puller team that killed your children's dad? Why don't you want to help the prosecution on that, Wendi? Why would you want to help the prosecution? All right, next we have number 90. Yeah, so when deposed in connection with Charlie's trial, Wendi pled the fifth when asked about what she discussed with her parents and Charlie about the murder. In fact, she pled the fifth to almost all questions. So why would you do that? Why would you keep pleading the fifth? And actually, I think that I stand corrected. I think this was not Charlie's trial, but one of the other trials where she did wind up cooperating. So I think it was Katie's second trial that this has to do. So I believe I stand corrected on that. Number 91, Georgia says, were you upset about being struck in Tallahassee when her motion to relocate was being denied? And you know what Wendi said? She says, I was relieved. I was happy in my job. Really? Then why would you spend a couple $100,000 fighting this forced requirement to live in Tallahassee till the boys aged out of high school? Why would you do that if you're so happy there? It makes no sense. Are you really telling the truth? 92. George is asking, would you consider the divorce with Dan Markel to be a nasty divorce? And Wendi just asked some generic question. Yeah, I think most divorces aren't very pleasant. Well, what's very pleasant got to do with nasty, a nasty divorce? Scorched earth type legal warfare between the parties, what Georgia was referring to. But Georgia then has to go, okay, but this one was very unpleasant, right? Then she then says, yeah, I consider this divorce to be very unpleasant. And then, so just very unpleasant is the most she'll get out of her. And then in litigation, Georgia's saying you two even fought over things as small as a tennis racket, right? And then Wendi says, well, I don't remember that. So all the little petty stuff that they're fighting over, spending all these attorney's fees on, such as a tennis racket, why wouldn't Wendi say, yeah, we're fighting over really little petty stuff? That's how much I was fighting him every step of the way. All right, next we have 93. Georgia, did Dan threaten to press kidnapping charges against you after Terraquat's objection to hearsay the judge overruled? No, I don't remember that. That's not something anyone would ever forget. Why? And also begs the question, why would Katie's attorney object? Why would they object to that? Those are preventing Katie McManus. So anyway, that's a really odd thing. It looked like they sort of were joined at the hip. The defense team's trying to prevent any of the folks responsible for the murder of Dan Markel from being held accountable. So if somebody threatens to press kidnapping charges against you, your ex, you know that. That's not something you don't remember. So take that as an admission. 94. George was asking, did he threaten to go after your law license? And then Wendi with a frowning face says, I don't remember that. No. And I'm telling you, no lawyer would forever forget anyone making such a threat. There's no way. 95, George was saying, do you remember him saying you failed to disclose a bunch of assets in the divorce process? When he says, I do remember that. She didn't dispute this allegation to Georgia. That was a huge threat to her job, etc. So she never said, no, I didn't hide any assets. I didn't do anything wrong. So she didn't do anything to really even defend herself on that. So that also is something that was a big threat to her job. And Dan could have easily had her fired. So the pressure was building and something needed to happen to release all that pressure building up against Wendi. 96, George is asking, do you remember this motion being filed 26 March of 14 when other things like alleging that your mother was disparaging Dan to the children? Wendi said, I'm familiar with that pleading. And then Georgia says, in that pleading, did he allege you were depriving him of physical access to the children? And then Wendi says, I don't remember the specifics. So this is your testimony that isn't credible whatsoever. You would recall these details, and you'd also prep for this as well. So her testimony is not credible, even just these simple things. Like, yeah, everybody knows, of course, that Dan brought up the fact that boys are saying, yeah, grandma says, Daddy, you're stupid, or Abba, you're stupid. So, I mean, she doesn't remember that. Seriously? There's no way a jury's going to buy this. They're going to see it for what it is. 97. Again, George is saying, do you recall whether he was complaining about you refusing to communicate with him about the first right of refusal to the children during your time with him? And then she goes on to say, well, I was frustrated about the Skyping. And Georgia says, lack of communication via Skype. And then Wendy's sitting there laughing and smiling and saying, it's hard to Skype with two toddlers. So it's not a credible excuse. And yet Donna would show the boys eating bacon, stuff like that. It was all about what can you do to rile up Dan, to torment him and upset him, and try to deny him his loving efforts to be a tremendous father. 98, Georgia, in that motion, do you recall him being upset about an allegation that you're feeding the kids non-kosher foods? When he says, I don't recall him being upset about that in general. I don't recall if it was in the motion or not. How would you? Of course you remember that. This is going on for months. The kosher versus non-kosher. And then Wendy goes on to say, kosher wasn't important to me, but it was to Danny. So Georgia says, was it important to Danny for the kids to observe that way of eating? She says it was. But you know what? She didn't respect that at all. They ate whatever they wanted, and they rubbed it in his face, showing him eating bacon and stuff. The boys eating bacon. So that's how this thing was so disintegrating between Wendy and Dan, because Wendy just did not want to do any of these kind of things of raising the kids in that kind of Jewish custom. For 99, Georgia, in that motion, did he seek to restrict your mother's contact with the kids to supervise visits only? Again, Wendy says, I don't remember, but if you like me to show me in the motion, I can take a look. How would you not know that? Of course you're going to remember that. Georgia says, okay, but you don't remember that portion? And then Wendy shaking her head, and again, squeezing her eyes shut, says no. Again, it's typical reaction to someone that's not telling the truth. 100 here. Georgia, do you remember the allegation that your mother made statements to the children that grandma hates you? And again, you had this weird objection from Tara Kwas, which, based on hearsay, was overruled. Your dad is stupid. Your dad is trying to take my sunshines away. Anything like that, do you recall? And then Wendy again goes, no, but I began happy to look at that if you'd like to show me. Of course she remembers that. So she had a chance to prepare with her lawyer. Her lawyer would have her look over the pleadings and go over all that. So she remembers that. She doesn't need any refreshing of memory. So she can't even admit the most damning motives to kill Dan by her mom, which had resulted in Dan's efforts to limit Dom's to supervise visits with the kids. So that's really the thing that got Donna riled up. And boy, did she get riled up. Again, this has helped lay the groundwork for motive to murder. 101, Georgia, do you recall that Mr. Markel was seeking sanctions against you personally in that motion? Of course you're going to remember that. And Wendy says, I don't remember that. An attorney especially wouldn't forget that, of all people. All right, next we have 102. Wendy is a lawyer by training, and she testified she doesn't know what the penalty for contempt of court is. How do you not know that as a lawyer, what the penalty is for contempt of court? Dan was going after you for contempt of court, and you didn't know what that meant. Most people that are not even lawyers know what that means. So Another sign. 103, Georgia, do you know whether this would have been a motion that you would have been shown to your mother? Would she have been aware of it? And then Wendy says, I probably would have shown it to my mom the motion. Of course, she would remember this discussion. Yet another lie and deflection that reveals the motives. So why won't she want to reveal the fact that they were really angry about what Dan had called them out on, which was the efforts to not only fight Dan, but also get Donna riled up, right? So feeding her mother this motion will get her riled up. And that in turn was helping Wendy seek out her agenda and get her agenda accomplished, right? So 104, after meeting parents and brother are very protective of her, when asked if the family liked Dan, Wendy asks at what specific point in time. Wendy only says, I do think my parents were angry with him, as if concluding, but not sure. And then Wendy refers to Dan treating her badly during the time of divorce for the cause of the anger. So she again downplays and deflects and also demeans Dan and plays the victim of Dan to justify the anger of her parents. Why does she keep feeding her parents stuff that would get them riled up to hate Dan? 105, Georgia says, the motion to preclude your mom from having unsupervised contact with her kids was still pending at the time of the murder, correct? It's possible. I mean, I don't think anyone took that motion seriously. And yet she got called on the fact at the last trial, Charlie's trial, that when Wendy emailed the grandma motion, she sent it to 12 separate friends and family members. So right there, she was taking it very serious and was very angry about it. For 106, Wendy admitted on the stand that Donna called Dan lots of disparaging names, but Wendy never mentioned it, and it was never brought up by Wendy that she told her mom to stop it and to mind her own business. It's like she enjoyed seeing her mom fan the anger flames of hatred against Dan. There's no other explanation for it. Georgia also said, I noticed that in the emails that your mother, referring to who I think is Dan Markel, as gibbers. What does that mean? And then Wendy says, gibbers was a nickname I gave Danny when he was being really difficult and causing me a lot of pain. It was sort of a nickname I gave him to make him feel like less threatening. So Georgia says so it was a derogatory thing. And then Wendy's sitting there saying, I wouldn't say it was derogatory. But you know what? Obviously, it was derogatory. Again, it's in an effort to downgrade and deflect even the most simple things that reveal the unmitigated hatred of Dan. 108, George is saying, did you call him gibbers to his face? And Wendy says, no, I called him Danny to his face. And then the judge at the time says, and gibbers would be what? How would you spell that? Wendy says, oh, I don't know. I've ever spelled it out. I guess in the emails, but I think it's spelled with a J, but I have to guess it's spelled with a G. You could spell with a G. Wendy again sounds unsure and tries to come off this innocent tone. And the judge then spells Jibbers. And then Wendy says that would be one way while nodding to the judge. Then Georgia really got her good and says, Miss Adelson, you had Mr. Markel's phone number programmed into your phone. Second. I miss it here. And your phone is gibbers, right? So she got busted there. That was something that Wendy didn't realize, that Georgia had this ability to say, look, it was in your phone and as a saved contact, gibbers. It wasn't Dan or the boy's dad. It was gibbers, the way she spelled it, the way Wendy and the judge had it spelled. For 109, Georgia says, do you much about your brother Charles Adelson's business practices? And Wendy says, I know that he does implant surgery. Georgia then says, do you know anything about whether he does offer discounts for cash or does a lot of business in cash? Again, Wendy squeezes her eyes tightly while shaking her head side to side while saying, I have no idea. So it shows her conscious mind is not agreeing with her verbal answer. Again, she's not being straight up truthful. So that's what I have for the indicators, folks. It's not all the indicators. There's others out there that I'm sure you guys have seen that follow this case closely. So if you have any questions on these, I'll go ahead and if you've had them before, just copy and paste them down here now, and I will get to them. Just a good girl. You have a comment. Wendy knew Dan had tried to contact her that morning, and she ignored his calls. And then she drives by and sees the police tape. Any normal person would be like, "Oh my god, yeah!" And they'd run out and they want to see what's going on. So that right there, I mean, all you need is one indicator to show her involvement, and the jury's going to see all these others just coalescing around the strongest ones, and they go, "You know what? There's no way she wasn't in on this." That's my view of how jurors would look at this evidence. Kathy, you're asking, is there any chance Donna and Charlie would ever turn on Wendy? I think they, and a part of them would really like to now already, but I think they're waiting to see what happens with Donna. If Donna gets convicted, then Charlie may down the road, especially after his mom dies. But if they were smart, they'd both offer to roll over on Wendy years ago. Martha Duncan, you're wondering if we'll see her playing dumb act during her mother's conspiracy trial in a murder trial. Yeah, I think she'll try acting that way. It's a consistent thing. You just try to have your innocent looking doe type eyes, just play dumb. But you know what, jury, they're not going to take that. The jury will see right through that. Signing Santa Clemente and Wendy was definitely under the impression that if she tilts her head and says, "I can't remember, I don't really recall," etc., it makes her appear innocent. Yeah, I think that's true. Evelyn, yeah, she's lied about a lot of stuff every time she testifies. Yeah, narrowly, she lied to the judge when she told him she didn't know how to spell it, lied to the judge on oath. Yeah, so really, when you look at who had the best lawyering, it was really the Latin King guy that only had a court appointed counsel. He got him the best deal. He'll be out in a few years, and these other folks will be life without parole when it's all said and done. Kind of reporter, yeah, those boys are not Adelsons. That's what the name they have now, but they are Markells. Yeah, Chandler, you're gonna want to see the video of Wendy in the back of the police car when she's taking the station. I'm curious if she's asking questions. She's a lawyer after all. Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see that video. I don't think they ever suspect her enough to do have a body cam or any kind of recording in the car. But yeah, that would have been really interesting to see. CJ and PA, her always pretending she doesn't remember this or that is silly as well. She's supposedly wickedly smart, right? Well, it's more than silly. It's something that the jurors will just really they really resent that. They don't like being lied to and somebody trying to play dumb with them that way. Why would she have all these instances where she's not being truthful in front of the jury? Why would she not come clean and just say even simple little things and just be forthright? Kosher style, you're saying Wendy said they were being questioned by ISOM while talking with the victim advocate and Jane. She said, "Oh my gosh, they're showing the car while looking at the news footage. They never said he was shot in a car. She never knew that, and yet she's talking. Oh my gosh, they're showing the car like, oh, that was implying like, oh, that's where he was shot at. Yeah, amazing. Nearly, you're saying if she was innocent, she'd say, "Ask me anything you want to know, and I'll tell you. I have nothing to hide. Not manipulate, deceive, lie, deflect, lie, then lie." Yeah, he says ongoing. This is the littlest stuff. You can't get a straight answer out of her. Does hope? Honestly, you say I believe Wendy lied more than she told the truth on her. I totally believe that. Yeah, I mean, little stuff, the big stuff. It was all deflection, misstatements, outright denials, outright lies. All right, so we have. Let's see here. Julie Merrington, you're asking, will this trial go ahead on the 18th of August? Well, it's actually starting the 19th. I think it is going to start the 19th. You never know for sure. There's always something that could happen, but I think it will start the 19th. Irene, yes, that's true. Wendy couldn't remember Harvey's 70th birthday present, but remembered Donna baking Dan banana bread. Yep. That's an indicator right there. We could add that, make that 110. Wendy can't remember Harvey's 70th birthday present. You know, so maybe not a big indicator, but it's to show guilt, but it's a big indicator to show somebody's not being straight up truthful with you. Elizabeth Bannicky, she has zero interest in being truthful. And Charles, she made an art of dodging questions. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the worst you'll see as far as dodging questions. Georgina Biggs, when Wendy goes to prison, will she have to pay back the benefits she received for the children? You know, that could be a theory that if she's prosecuted for that, I mean, the Fed should go after her for that if she's convicted. But yeah, if you kill somebody and then get benefits from that, that should be some kind of crime in and of itself. Yes, Helen, I plan to cover Donna's trial. Plan to have John there show up for most all of it. Signing Clemente, when she said in the trial that she can't imagine she would have said that her brother really did look into hiring a hitman instead of just saying no every year, had to realize she's guilty. Yeah, she denies that she said that, and that's why Jeff Lacasse was able to come back and say, no, that's what she did say. Oh, for peace, must be a strategic reason that Wendy has not been arrested yet. Well, hopefully it's just the fact they want to take one at a time. They should be charging these Adelsons much more rapid fire nature here. So slow. This is the slowest prosecution effort I've ever seen. They're almost treating it like it's a cold case. John Smith, you're saying the same thing happened with Lori Daybell. She was charged and convicted of getting Social Security after killing her own children. I'm not following that case enough to know that, but yeah, that's what they should be doing. Yes, Tattletales, I do think police are pretty sharp, but Isom, I do think got played by Wendy. But on the other hand, she just kept on talking because Isom seemed to be believing what she's saying. So she couldn't help but reveal things that were incriminating. I would say Isom just didn't know they're incriminating at the time. Irene, do I think Rashomon actually thought he could get Charlie off on a technicality, or was it just a cash grab? I don't know him personally. I don't know how good of an attorney he is if he's got good facts, but he didn't have any good facts, and we don't know if Charlie is actually being truthful about what Rashbaum said. But assuming Rashbaum told me he's gonna, win the case if he scored at least 80 on his direct testimony and cross examination, I would say that's not very good lawyering. So it seems like way too many lawyers are in it for the money and not about true justice. I mean, it is a business, so they got to pay the bills. They need to make income, but yeah, it can get in the way of concerns and the mission for justice. Yeah, Phoebe Beach. She knew while at the police station the realtor texted her about a shooting on Trescott. Yeah, so she right away should have pieced two and two together. She didn't act surprised or alarmed. It's like she knew what was going on there at Trescott. Okay, let's see. All right, stand by. Somebody's saying they sent me an email. Stand by here a second. Yeah, let's see. Stand by. Okay. Yeah, KPT. Wendy did give up Charlie pretty quickly. Chandler, you're saying when you're guilty of something, do you tell your lawyer that's representing you? A lot of times not, especially on serious crimes. The attorney is not told the truth right away. It may take a while to develop that. Okay. Ryan B, you're saying I don't get the Isom slander. He was being a good cop detective. They knew she was smart enough to lawyer up if it got too tough. He got her to talk and reveal that was the point. No. Well, if he really thought she was behind it and you're wanting her to talk, yeah, you could just play dumb like that. But he really did get taken for a ride by her, and I don't think he ever did pick up on the fact that he's being set up like a fool. So we're not slandering Detective Isom at all. He's not an experienced homicide detective. He did his best that he could do at the time. So, but you know what? If you look at what happened after she left, or while she's still there, they didn't do a full extrapolation on her phone. They never thought she was a suspect enough to do any search of her emails. They never searched her emails. They never made any effort to wiretap her. They never made any efforts to get WhatsApp messages between all these parties. So there's a lot of stuff they dropped the ball on. They never realized they got scammed. And maybe when she lawyered up right away and they had gotten that call from her lawyer while she's driving down to Miami a couple days later after Dan's murder, maybe then they should have figured out, hey, she suckered us, she scammed us. But I think it took them a couple years before they realized that they've been played. William Master's saying Wendy's ignoring both her mother and brother, yet these two fools continue to protect her. Unimaginable if I were Wendy's brother or mother, she'd go down and pass in the Titanic. Misery loves company. Yeah, and Charlie's already fought his case, and once Charlie got life without parole, he should have cut a deal a lot earlier to get Wendy. So YB, you're asking if I ever read Dan Markel's book, Punishment or Privilege. I've seen excerpts of, but I've not read that. Tattletales, you think Jane McPherson knows Wendy used her? I doubt it. I don't know. Don't know if I'm going to cover the trial live or not yet. I may just do some evening recaps. Yeah, that's true. Optimus Green. Detective Hill actually said to Lacasse, I don't think she was involved. That's true. They did tell Lacasse that. I think that was the second time he went there, which was like at least a month after he went there the first time when he was called in. The second and third time he went on his own to give him more stuff that he had realized and thought after he thought more about it. Manuel Cabuto, Wendy told Isom that she sounded like she might have thought she was guilty. I'll take it to police. I wonder guilty of what? By then she didn't even know, quote unquote, about the shooting. Yeah. But thinking that you're guilty of something, that's why you will not never got in a police car as a lawyer. You say, wait a minute, time out. You're bringing me down to the station. What detective you think I'm not going to get in your car. You can't force me to get in your car. What are you saying? I need to come down to your station for? Jay Moore, does there exist a satisfactory explanation by the state for its delay in arresting Wendy? I don't think it's satisfactory. I think it's Very unsatisfactory to take one at a time approach for these Adelsons. I think it just shows lack of aggression. They're not tough enough on crime. You're not confident enough in your abilities to prosecute cases like this. But Elizabeth Bannicky, if Charlie would decide to flip on Wendy, would there be any legal benefit for him to do so at this point? I mean, there's a chance he could possibly get something less than life without parole. Maybe they take off the without parole and make it with parole. The judge could maybe do that if he provided substantial help. But I mean, if they can convict Wendy without his cooperation, then why don't they still go for that? Jeff Steinborn, do you think the Adelsons should testify against each other to get lighter sentences? I mean, they should have done it way before they go to trial. If you wait till after your trial, you're not going to get that much shaved off. I mean, look at how much of a shaving off of his time that Rivera got. Rivera got what, like 19 years, served concurrently with a federal one. He was doing 15, 4, I think it was 15. So he got a really sweetheart deal by coming in early. And that's normally the case. If you come in early, you make it a lot easier on the prosecutor. They'll cut you a lot better deal because they're wanting to go after the bigger fish. Tattletales, you're saying if you take it for what it is, Wendy did a great job at the police interview, cut off her points, got her points submitted on possible suspects, even had guest star Jane McPherson come in. Well, I don't know how you say you did a great job when you left all this evidence that looks like you're involved in the murder. So I don't see how that's a great job at all. Yes, she left a lot of breadcrumbs there trying to point the finger to other people, but the more you look at her statement, the more you look at how none of it makes sense and doesn't add up as an innocent person. Yeah, Mr. Love, you're saying guilty verdicts for Sifredo, Katie, and Charlie. They've proven they can get guilty verdicts, so why would they lack confidence regarding Donna and Wendy? Donna and Wendy should be tried together. I don't. I think that they're taking one at a time, and if any time they don't get a conviction on Adelson, they're not going to go after any others. That's a very, very slow, non-aggressive, low energy way to prosecute folks. I don't get it. Kathy D. Chung. The strangest part of the Isom interview is when Wendy mentioned how the liquor store clerk commented on her blue eyes. She's quite enamored by her own appearance constantly. Yeah, I mean that's what you remember is somebody commenting on your eyes. That's what you're going to think of when you know Dan's dying up there. That you're thinking about that the guy mentioned your blue eyes. Really? Johnny Supertramp. Wendy should have been suspect number one, but was never treated like a suspect. She sort of was in the sense that they brought her down the station. That was very good. The timing of it, they found her. They brought her down there. They grabbed her phone, but they didn't do a full search of the phone. And so in many ways, they just sort of like delisted her as a suspect within the first hour. Tattletales. When he never came back to speak to the police, I was unaware one could simply refuse to cooperate with the police. You can in America if you don't want to talk to the police, unless there's some kind of subpoena that the state has, like in Florida, where they can force you to testify. Then yeah, you don't have to cooperate. But why would you not cooperate if your two sons' father was murdered? Instead of cooperating, you'd be making demands of the police to catch the criminals and give you details on where they're at, the status of the investigation. Girl Grammy, you're asking why don't they think the prosecution will, why do you think the prosecution won't press Wendi on why she won't turn over the heirloom ring back to Markells? I don't know. I don't know if they're saving that for her own trial. It's a great question to ask. It's one of the best questions, just along the lines up there is the lack of visitation to show the hatred of Dan Markel. It shows a living, active hatred of Dan Markel. It's a great thing to ask. What happened to it? We still don't know. No one's asked that question while she's under oath. Not that we'll get the truth. All right, gonna ask. We're over 2 hours, 12 minutes here. I'm gonna ask, answer a few more questions here. E50 gal, 150 gal. I hope the state watch your channel. Use some of the things you've mentioned. I mean, they should know about all these kind of things. So, Linda Capture saying you don't think this murder would have happened without Wendi knowing about it. That's what a lot of people are going to think on the jury. It's like, what are the odds they're going to do this behind her back? Most people are just not going to believe that's even possible. Let's pretend Wendy didn't know about her family plan at Charlie's trial. Wouldn't she have been livid that her family didn't tell her they were being extorted? Yeah, I agree with that. And that could be another indicator as well. And the thing is, George didn't press her enough on that. When she brought that up, I just found out this morning. She should have been really pressed on that. Say, really? So you changed the boy's name and you knew the killers were already apprehended and arrested, and you'd moved to Miami when you loved Tallahassee. I mean, what? There's so many different follow up questions that could have been asked of her. Armand Fence, removing Dan's name and the middle name from his son shows a gigantic amount of vindictiveness. Yeah, Dan's last name you're talking about, I agree. Tattletales, you're saying Wendy's friend Sarah, who was a public defender, might still only recently said she thinks Wendi might be involved, considering Wendi asked her to make a public statement about her innocence. Yeah, I think we're finally seeing a turning of the tide where a lot of Wendy's friends, up till a couple of years ago, were like, "Oh, we don't think Wendi was in on this," but that's definitely changed in the last couple of years. Sonny in San Clemente, would a lawyer really tell their client not to talk to their family at all? I mean, the fact that Wendi hasn't talked to her family at all speaks volumes to me. Yeah, it is. It does speak volumes. I think an attorney's going to say, hey, don't talk about anything involving this case, the murder of Dan Markel, with your family, because your family can't keep a lid on things. That's one thing. But to not even ask, like Donna's irate about, she doesn't even ask how Charlie's doing. Oh, that's horrible. What happened to Charlie? She has no regard for what happens to the rest of her family. And think about it. She's moved even further away from her dad down at South Beach. Now she's supposedly in Colorado. We don't even know where. Does Harvey even know where she's at? Leah Stevens, why would the state ask Wendi about her using WhatsApp if they didn't have relevant evidence? I'm hoping that's the case, but I'm not very confident they were that aggressive in getting those kind of details secured on communication Wendi had on things like WhatsApp. Yeah, McCramble. You're saying Wendy's house was never searched, her work email never searched. Yeah, so they dropped the ball on so many different things. She also had a friendship with a judge she's working for in Miami who's connected to the judge in Tallahassee who's getting inside scoop of what's going on. So yeah, she thought she had those inside connections to stop her from ever getting prosecuted, but I think those are going to run out, and I think she's going to be charged this year. Carrie Retchless, you're saying, Carl, can you please tell again the Markel family on here that we're all rallying here to get justice? Yes, thank you. I think that the Markells do appreciate all your support for their cause, and they see all the love and concern for what they're going through. That's got to be encouraging to them. So thank you for all your support of the Markells, and that's going to be something that is not a thing to celebrate, but a thing that just reflects it finally happened when Donna gets convicted, and it's going to be more relief. But think about it; they still have Wendi to go after, so that's why we're talking about Wendi. They need to have more of the folks behind this be prosecuted. So there's not going to be any justice for Dan until they at least get Wendi convicted and sentenced. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks again for your wonderful support of the victims of this horrible, vicious crime. That the Markells know that you got their back, and I think that really look forward to seeing the Markells if Leslie and I make it down there. So it's they're really impressive people. So y'all take care, and we'll be covering more on this later. Y'all have a great week. Be safe. Take care.